security.
East-west lines. Politicians who need a political...
Ready to crack down.
Already troubled economy.
Is Canadian media corrupt? We're told to trust the news, but what happens when the news stops earning that trust? When almost every major outlet is owned by one of a few corporations or directly funded by the government itself, how can Canadians not question that what they're hearing is the full story? Today, I'm going to be breaking down how Canadian media became so biased, how that bias shapes the way we view everything from politics to housing, and why more and more people are shifting to independent podcasts and YouTube channels for the truth. Almost every major Canadian news outlet is controlled by just a handful of players. Postmedia, which owns over 130 newspapers and leans openly conservative, Bell Media, which runs CTV, Rogers, which owns City News and dozens of radio stations, and of course, the CBC, funded directly by the federal government. Independent researchers have shown Canada's media and telecom landscape is highly concentrated. A small cluster of companies controls a very large share of news, broadcasting, and digital distribution. That concentration shapes what gets covered and how. And it gets worse. Because of a federal law called the Online News Act, or Bill C-18, platforms like Facebook and Instagram have actually blocked Canadian news entirely. The law was meant to make big tech companies pay Canadian outlets when their news is shared in links on their platforms. But instead of paying, Meta and Google pulled Canadian news content altogether, arguing that the law was unworkable and would expose them to endless fees. So now the country's biggest social networks, where most people get their news and information and updates, doesn't show any Canadian journalism at all. Major outlets lost traffic, smaller ones lost visibility, and readers lost access to reliable information. In trying to protect journalism, Ottawa and these major platforms ended up burying it. And it's everyday Canadians, not the billion-dollar companies or political decision makers, who pay the price. Each of these outlets claim to be independent, but their biases are well documented. CBC, rated center-left by Media Bias/Fact Check, funded 70% by Ottawa. CTV and Global, slightly center-left, both owned by billion-dollar telecoms. National Post, Toronto Sun, Ottawa Citizen, all right-leaning, owned by Postmedia, which is ironically two-thirds owned by a US hedge fund. So even before we start talking about reporting, who owns each one should tell you how they're going to lean. And if you've ever wondered why CBC runs sympathetic coverage of liberal policies, or why the Sun Network runs attack columns on woke culture, it's not random. It's baked into their editorial culture. But bias isn't just about what's being said, it's about what's being left out. Omission, framing, and emotional language are what shape public opinion. And the trust problem continues even further than that. Right now, Canada's biggest media outlets, CBC, Globe and Mail, Postmedia, Torstar, are actually suing OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, for allegedly using their journalism to train its models. They're seeking billions in damages, arguing that the AI systems are profiting off of their work. But let's be honest, these same outlets have spent years taking government subsidies, lobbying for bailouts, and leaning on legislation like Bill C-18 to survive. It's hard to claim the moral high ground when your business relies on taxpayer funding, political protection, and now lawsuits. If the industry had innovated instead of relying on handouts, maybe they wouldn't be fighting to stay relevant right now. Nowhere is that bias more relevant or damaging than in real estate. For years, headlines have screamed, "The housing crisis is out of control. Young Canadians will never own a home again. Foreign buyers are destroying affordability." Those stories get clicks, but they don't tell the full picture. Mainstream news thrives on fear. It's the easiest way to drive engagement and add revenue. When CBC, CTV, or Global cover housing, they rely heavily on press releases from major banks or government data, rarely talking to local experts actually selling homes, analyzing neighborhood level demand, or seeing what's happening on the ground. That disconnect shapes perception. It's why buyers and sellers are constantly confused as to whether the market's hot or cold or collapsing. An article from Stories Media this year pointed out that Canadians are flocking to real estate podcasts. Why? Because people want clarity, not chaos. Listeners are tired of being scared into inaction. They want balanced, data-driven insight from people who actually live and work in the market. And they're finding it right here on YouTube. The numbers don't lie. According to the Reuters Institute, Canadians' trust in traditional news is at its lowest point in a decade. Only about 40% of people say they trust mainstream media outlets. Meanwhile, podcasts and YouTube creators are surging. Nearly half of Canadian adults listen to podcasts monthly, and YouTube has become the #1 platform for news in adults under 35. People aren't turning away from information, they're turning away from gatekeepers. Platforms like YouTube have made that possible. Anyone can share research, information, and real on the ground stories, not just corporations with $1 million studios. Now, YouTube isn't perfect. The algorithm learns what you click, what you like, and what you watch, and it starts feeding you more and more of that same content. So yeah, it can build echo chambers if you're not careful. But here's the difference. You still decide what you want to watch. You can choose to hear multiple sides of the same issue. You can subscribe to creators who have come to earn your trust, not ones who were handed it by a network executive. This choice is what makes independent media so powerful. Even with its flaws, it gives Canadians control over what information we consume. And that's what the Vancouver Life podcast was built to do. Every week, Dan and Ryan talk about the Canadian housing market, the real numbers, not the manipulated ones, or how policies, trends, and macroeconomics are shaping your ability to buy, sell, or invest. No corporate sponsors telling them what to say, just data, discussion, and transparency. And it's working because people want this kind of content. When you listen to the Vancouver Life podcast or subscribe to a channel like mine, you're hearing directly from real professionals, not PR trained spokespeople or headlines that are designed to scare you. So, if you're tired of being told what to think and you'd rather have a real understanding of what's happening in your market, check it out. The Vancouver Life Podcast, available on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts from. All of this matters because this isn't just about media bias or corporate ownership. It's about influence. If Canadians only ever hear one version of a story, whether it's about housing, politics, or the economy, it shapes how we vote, where we live, and what we believe is even possible. That's why independent media isn't just entertainment, it's accountability. When more people are free to speak and more people have access to all perspectives, we all make better decisions. The future of journalism shouldn't be about control, it should be about choice. So I want to hear from you. Do you still trust mainstream Canadian news? Or are you getting your information from somewhere else? Drop a comment below. I'd like to see how divided we really are. And if you enjoyed that video, hit that like, subscribe, and share this to someone who still believes everything they see on the 6 o'clock news.